somebody, whoever it was, whether it was inside the campaign or whether it was Melania herself, she did say that she wrote the speech with little help. Who knows? No one's taking responsibility. The campaign has said that they're not going to fire anyone, and then we see a report that heads are going to roll over this. She clearly the speech is clearly plagiarized. It's the same exact sentences multiple times throughout the course of the speech. You can't deny that. I mean, when they play the video over and over again of Michelle Obama saying it and Melania Trump saying it, it's very clear where the words came from. And sure, some of the words and phrases may be common. However, we know exactly where it came from. Now, the fallout of this, I think, has been interesting as well, in the sense that I think it's very unfortunate that they put her up on this global national stage with 35 million people watching and humiliated her, whether it was done purposely to keep this in the news cycle rather than the media talking about the floor fight we had yesterday, or whether it was just an oversight of an organized campaign. Melania has made it clear throughout the course of this campaign she's not really interested in getting dragged through the mud. She's not interested in the nitty-gritty of the politics in the campaign. She wants to be home raising her son. This was her first real big moment. She's only spoken, I believe, one other time on the campaign trail up to this point. She did it last night. She looked great. She sounded great, even though the words she was saying came from a previous speech. She did a good job. And here we are now, not talking about her as a potential first lady and what she has to offer the campaign, but instead the fact that she gave a speech that wasn't her own.
And that's the thing. It was a small portion of this speech, which otherwise, as you say, I thought she was elegant. She was very well spoken. Her story about her immigration to the United States and being inculcated with American values and appreciating her adoptive home country.
Best speech of the night, I thought.
It was the highlight speech, and this has completely been stepped on. And this is the thing that I think bothers me, because if she had come out and said, I didn't realize this, I'm very sorry, if they fired some low-level speechwriter or something, he said, we are sorry for this. Michelle Obama made a couple good points. We shouldn't have done it this way, of course. Story over. It would mostly be over, but instead we have this hodgepodge of contradictory and bizarre explanations, which some of them are saying this is not plagiarism at all, and others are saying Trump is furious, this is a humiliation, heads are going to roll. Corey Lewandowski saying there should be firings. It seems like this is a Trump world that is at war with itself internally.
Or you have Chris Christie's explanation, which was that at least it was 93% original.
Yeah. Well, I think
it was 93% original, and that's pretty darn good.
Well,
I think we have some evidence of that, and I understand there's a double standard where Democrats and Republicans are concerned, but if you look back to the way that Barack Obama handled this exact same controversy in 2008, he came out and said, yeah, I stole it from Deval Patrick. Deval Patrick's a friend of mine. I liked what he said. I've called him. We're fine. Everything's okay. And you didn't hear anything about that from 2008 until today, when everybody remembered that this happened.
And that was the riff where "Don't tell me words don't matter." That whole
exactly.
That whole riff.
Exactly. So I mean, I think that there's a lot to what Katie is saying, is that the campaign's kind of hodgepodge response to this has really contributed to it. I think if they had come out and said, look, we're sorry, and this is the way speech writing goes. Sometimes you hear something in your mind, anybody who's ever worked with a speechwriter, and his phrase will stick in your mind, not a whole paragraph generally. But, you say, look, I heard this thought somewhere. It sounded good to me. I went with it. We're sorry. Sorry to have embarrassed Melania. This thing would probably have all blown over. But instead, because it's Trump, we get chaos.
All right, so there's one other thing, because we've hit on the floor fight from yesterday, the Melania plagiarism story, which is genuinely driving today's news cycle, which is deeply unhelpful if you're the Trump campaign.
Right.
There was one other problem, then we're going to pivot to some of the positives from last night and preview tonight. After Melania Trump stole the show, looked great, performed very well before people pieced the plagiarism stuff together, Trump comes back out after his big dramatic entrance, walks off, and it almost felt like really the show was over for the night, although it wasn't. As delegates and attendees streamed out of the hall, there were 4 more featured speeches remaining, including one of the rising stars in the party, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa. She addressed a hall that was probably 90% empty by the time she got out there, with just a few hardy delegates remaining, interrupting her with chants. It was an extremely awkward thing to witness at a major party political convention, which, again, usually they are timed out. People are threatened to stay on time and keep it within the so-called primetime window. This thing bled close to midnight, where the networks all cut away. as did most of the delegates on the floor.
Right.
How did that happen? How can this be avoided? Do they start earlier? Are the speeches just too long?
Well, I'm not sure how long they planned out for each of these speeches. Of course, Rudy, I think, was getting caught up in the moment. And I think his speech ran a little longer than maybe you would have expected. But I don't remember the speeches being terribly long.
Well, I can't imagine that presentation from the Special Forces guys from Benghazi was intended to be as long as it was.
That was the one, I think, that probably threw him a little
I would
off.
guess that was probably what threw the program
Mike
off.
Flynn went a long time, it felt like.
But the thing about this is that when you are doing stagecraft of this type, you have to look for your emotional high point, and you want that to be the close.
Right.
You want that. You want to. You just described this almost perfectly. Donald Trump comes out, introduces his wife. His wife gives a very emotionally appealing speech. Right off the emotional high from Rudy Giuliani, transfer to another emotional high. Trump comes back out. That's basically a drop mic moment right there.
Close the curtains,
Right.
go
Close
home.
the curtains.
Go home, right.
Absolutely. That's the way, that moment should have been the close of the convention last night.
Well, and I thought it was extremely disrespectful to Joni Ernst and the veterans who were on stage behind her during her speech to have her come out late in the night after all the excitement was over. The media all day and the campaign all day yesterday sold the Melania Trump speech as the finale, as it should have been. And I think that we were surprised to see people come out after her speech. Joni Ernst spoke to an empty arena, and then two veterans who were chosen to speak at the convention, Jason Beardsley being one of them. He's a former Green Beret, served in Afghanistan, had really incredible things to say that the news wasn't covering because the event was over, and people in the audience didn't hear. And so they really should have put that beforehand, just out of respect for the people taking their time on the national stage to show up and be there. I thought that was a real big mistake on their part.
Guy, I was on the floor when this happened, by the way. I was on the floor when Melania Trump was finishing up the speech, and Joni Ernst came out, and other speakers came out, and what the delegates around me kept saying is, I can't believe there's another speech. Is there another speech after that? I can't believe there's another speech
There are
after
four,
this.
friends.
Right, yes.
There are four.
And people were saying, I can't believe that we're still here. So, yeah, I think the delegates were surprised by this. I think a lot of them just assumed that the show was over. And that's the reason why they left.
You know, Guy, you used a word which I think is very good, that the conventions are typically like a pageant. I actually think they're usually treated by the candidate as more like a wedding, and the candidate is the bride. They typically do not allow themselves to be seen before the big moment where they come out and give their speech, and it's for that reason. This is really kind of almost an orchestrated mass hypnosis thing, these conventions are. It's an emotional build-up all the way to the end. The candidate comes out. By that time, everybody's in a frenzy.
Although
the balloons are dropping.
In fairness, and Trump did do this. They do a quick hello, a
Right.
surprise appearance to greet their spouse almost always. Romney did it. Obama's done it. We got that from Trump. But again, it just
timing of
wasn't.
this was bad.
The timing didn't work.
And I think that, though, that if you look at what do people remember from conventions, I think most conventions come and go on both sides with nothing being remembered. In the entire time I've watched conventions since 1984 that I can remember, I remember Clint Eastwood talking to an empty chair. I remember Sarah Palin's speech in 2008. I remember Obama's speech in 2004. Apart from that, I don't remember hardly any moments of any convention. So what they're looking for is one of those moments, and it clearly
Emotional. I
hasn't
remember
happened yet.
Sel Miller 2004 is one that
That
I
was
remember.
another good one.
Spitballs! Spitballs! All right, so let's talk about Rudy Giuliani.
Greatness!
It was, yes, he had several shots of espresso, came out there and really let her rip. But it was electric inside. I don't know if you're sitting at home if it translates, if it was a little too yelly or shouty, a la Howard Dean. But in there, it played very, very well, and it seemed like he was genuinely emotional and impacted by a lot of the current events going on in the country and around the world, and was viscerally upset with the state of the country, with the Obama-Clinton machine, and was giving everything. He left it all on the field for Donald Trump,
Yep.
certainly. I think emotionally, one of the high points you'd have to say of Monday night, yes?
I would say yes. And I think, based on the recent events in the last 2 weeks of the police officers in our cities being assassinated and murdered, and the state of the country in terms of race relations, I thought Rudy Giuliani's repeated lines about, when you call the police, they don't ask you if you're black, white, or Hispanic. They just show up to save you.
Yes.
And he really had an important unifying message. We've been talking about unity for weeks now. I think that what Rudy Giuliani said last night actually was a unifying message. And, he has a record of reducing crime, holding people accountable, and it almost made you wish that he was running for president, quite frankly. But I think he had one of the best speeches of the night, and not only just last night, but probably has one of the best speeches of the convention.
I also thought it was gratifying because whenever we try to discuss radical Islam and terrorist attacks, we have this whole swirl of hand-wringing and concern trolling about not smearing Islam, which is not what anyone is doing. There's almost always the distinction is made, and Rudy went through 3 steps of it. He said, notice I did not say all of Islam. Notice I did not say most of Islam. I said radical Islamic terrorists, and you know who you are. That felt like an emotional release. That was a huge applause line. It's like, thank you. We all understand this, but in such a big audience on a big stage, making that crystal clear, I thought was a strong point.
And just one more point on that. When he discussed it, I thought one of the most important lines that he said during that speech at the end of the 3 points he made was that when you don't call it radical Islam, you are actually smearing all of Islam because you're not willing to distinguish what the problem is. And no one talks about that. And I think that was a very important point for him to make.
I was down on the floor for that speech as well, and I really could not believe the response. I didn't see that response from the delegates in any other speech, even Melania's speech.
It was by far
and away, that was the best energy of the night for the Republican Party, was Rudy Giuliani's speech. And I think it's because for two reasons. First off, Rudy Giuliani is going to be forever known as America's mayor. He's the guy who got us out of 9/11. He was just leaving office when 9/11 happened. I think you remember that they actually postponed the elections 3 weeks because of the attacks on 9/11. And this is the guy who led America. He and George Bush led America to come to grips with what had happened, with the vast terrorism that had happened. But the other thing is that I think he touched on the fact that there are a lot of angry people that are angry because people aren't talking about these things. They're being shushed by political correctness, and that's been a major theme over the past year.
Well, I'd say the entire first night seemed like one giant rejection of political correctness.
Exactly, but
for better and worse.
But Giuliani, I think, hit the emotional mark better than anybody did last night. And yes, he was a little yelly. He was, gesturing wildly, but I think that was a bit of a catharsis. And so I think it worked really well.
Leon, I want to ask you one other question here, and then we'll talk about tonight. One thing that I saw watching the speeches live, and I had my Twitter feed open, and there was almost universal revulsion being expressed by the left of center folks in my timeline over the exploitation of grieving people, whether it was Sean Smith's mother from Benghazi, whether it was the Benghazi survivors, whether it was the loved ones of people who were killed by illegal immigrants. Everyone on the left seemed to be saying this is so grotesque, this is exploitation. A, is that fair? And B, even if it is fair, is it wildly hypocritical coming from them? That's a leading question for you. Go.
Yeah, I have to say that I agree kind of with both premises of the question. I would answer both of those yes. I actually did find Sean Smith's mother's presentation to be a little distasteful. Not
Really?
her presentation, but bringing her out that way. I just, the whole choreography of it, and I don't know. I definitely think she has something important to say, and I'm glad that she has a chance to say it. I just don't know that this forum and this venue, as part of a partisan election, is the right. It struck me funny, and maybe I'm just way too prim about this, but to me, I was a little bit turned off by that portion of the program. But you're right. There's a tremendous. It's tremendously hypocritical.